by a call that I got yesterday from a woman who was crying and talking about how her daughter is gay and her friends are trans, and one of her daughter's friends down in Florida just tried to commit suicide, and she repeated twice, I want to just tell everybody, please, this is just the beginning. They're going to be coming after your kids too. And so I wrote this piece today thinking that, or wanting to put forward the proposition that we are all exhausted. In fact, this is one of the more common words that is used to describe people's experience of Donald Trump, is that they're just exhausted. Republicans talk about this, obviously Democrats talk about this, everybody kind of talks. It is like, Donald Trump is just exhausted. It's just it's a fire hose of lies, over 30,000 documented lies while he was in the White House. He continues to lie constantly. But it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, it goes way beyond that. You've got the fear and hate mongers on Fox so-called news. You've got the trolls on social media that are not just, our homegrown trolls, but they're being pumped and amplified by trolls from Russia, perhaps. I mean, there's speculation that some are coming out of China or Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, now owns the second largest piece of Twitter, and so who knows where that's going to go. But and the blowhards on right-wing hate radio. Also, it seems that both Twitter and Facebook, at the very least, are tilting their algorithms heavily toward right-wing memes and right-wing folks, posters, participants. And then, you've got the Republican politicians who have determined that Hitler's strategy in 1933, Hitler didn't start out going after the Jews. I mean, he ranted about them in his book, Mein Kampf, back in the 20s. But in 1933, when he took power, the first group that he went after, the very first group that Hitler went after, were gay men, lesbians, and in particular, trans people. Trans people were very much present in the German social scene in 1933. And Hitler went after them in a big way. That was his first foray into what today we would call, the culture wars. And obviously the Republican legislators in America are looking back and taking lessons from Hitler. Trump for years had a collection of Hitler's speeches beside his bed. G. Gordon Liddy, I don't know if you caught the new Plumbers show. I think it's on HBO. Louise and I watched it last night. G. Gordon Liddy used to love to listen to Hitler's speeches in the original German, yes. But anyway, so all of this is like grinding us down. Now, there's a word for this that has historically been applied to African Americans, to black people in the United States. It's called weathering. And it's the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of the closed doors of opportunity, of microaggressions, of distrust shown by other people, all punctuated by the occasional violent or even deadly all-out attack. Dr. Shamar Charles, who's a physician and an expert, he himself is African-American, an expert on how weathering damages African-Americans, describes the phenomena as this way. First of all, he says it kills us in slow, less obvious ways than white people. And he said, borrowing the term from environmental studies, weathering is similar to the soil erosion that happens over time due to exposure to the elements. A small buildup of negatively impacting events eventually leads to a massive landslide or avalanche. He says, racism forms cracks in our spirit, like cracks in the pavement of a busy road. Constant bouts of discrimination fill and expand the crack like raindrops. Over time, the crack becomes a pothole that no longer resembles its original form. He said, in humans, this erosion is the accumulation of a broad range of adverse like high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and poorer mental health that lead to early death. So, the group, the people in the United States who have been at the forefront of experiencing weathering, of experiencing this slow drip, drip, drip that just over time grinds people down, have always been African Americans. They are, they receive the very worst of this. Although, I'm guessing that there are some trans people who would say, no, wait a minute, what about us? We've been around here for 400 years too, and we've been discriminated against, hated on, killed. I'm not trying to define who is more or less the victim of bigotry and hate. The problem is that bigotry and hate has now become the principal political tool that is being used, number one, to make money by the Murdoch empire, by the Zuckerberg, all these billionaires who own these media companies and whatnot. But also, hate and fear have become the principal tools that are being used by an entire political party, the Republican Party here in the United States. And they're going after queer people, people of color, folks who don't conform to traditional gender stereotypes, young people who are concerned about climate change in the face of Republican obstruction and ridicule, students overwhelmed by debt, sick people who are afraid to go to the doctor or are cutting their pills in half because they can't afford them, working people who can barely afford rent and food, parents who don't have enough money to properly dress or prepare their kids for school, seniors fearing the Republican Party is going to finally kill off Social Security and Medicare once and for all. All of us are being weathered to different degrees. And it's tough work taking on the morbidly rich and their corporate allies. I mean, they're ubiquitous, they're tireless. There's literally not a city, town, or rural area in America that is not reached right now by right-wing hate radio. I'm guessing probably less than 10% of America is served by progressive talk radio, but 100% of America is served by right-wing hate radio. Not only that, you've got an army of trolls ranging from American Nazis to Russian intelligence operatives pumping out a steady minute-by-minute stream of lies, hate and disinformation on social media and websites all across the country. You've got five corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court legalizing political bribery. So you've got the entire Republican Party basically in the pocket of these folks, not to mention the so-called corporate problem solvers like Manchin, Gottheimer, and Sinema. I mean, it's exhausting. Every state controlled by a Republican legislature is passing laws making it harder to vote, criminalizing voter registration drives, reducing access to the ballot, all while purging black and brown people and students and Social Security voters from the voting rolls. They're using the lie of voter fraud to justify that corrosion of democracy. They use the lie of groomers to vilify queer people, teachers, and librarians. They use the lie of Democrats want abortion right up to the day of birth to attack politicians defending women's rights to access to reproductive health care. I mean, they're just relentless. Oil, gas, health insurance, hospitals, big pharma, corporate landlords, all working to pick our pockets and reduce us to poverty so that they can buy another private jet or mega yacht for the CEO. They have more money than God, and it seems like there's a never-ending stream of supply of shills and hired guns who are willing to do their dirty work for the right price. So what do? Well, I think the best lessons come from the people who've struggled with this the longest, African Americans and Native Americans. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King famously said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That does not mean that justice is coming and we should just sit back. I mean, that was the lesson that gays, Jews, and union workers learned in 1933 in Germany, that sometimes hate and fascism actually win, at least over the short term. Instead, what it tells us, all of us, is that members of marginalized communities who are receiving the brunt of the Republican Party's campaign of hate, obstruction, and fear, and their allies alike, must never give up. The vast majority of Americans just want peace. They want a decent life for themselves and their kids. They want access to good paying jobs, healthcare, and education. They want people to get along with each other and for the slaughter of our children to stop. And if enough of us turn up at the polls in 18 months, we may be able to pull this off. We cannot give in.